Make her serve where everyone can see the chains, Lady Vanessa Whitmore said, and the Silver Hall went quiet just long enough for Emily Carter to hear her own heartbeat. The Blood Moon Banquet had been built for beauty, power, and choosing a queen, not for a poor Omega in a grey cloak carrying wine beneath 100 glittering stairs, yet there she was, moving across the black marble floor with a silver tray trembling between her hands. Every step made the small chains at her wrists whisper against each other, soft enough to be elegant, cruel enough to be heard. The sound followed her like a second voice. Emily kept her eyes lowered, not because she had no pride, but because pride was dangerous in a room full of people who believed she had no right to possess it. Above her, chandeliers burned with hundreds of white candles, their light catching on gold goblets, crystal bowls, polished armor, and jeweled gowns that cost more than the little cottage her mother had died in. The great hall of Blackthorn Palace stretched nearly the length of a football field, with towering stone pillars carved into wolves and moons, crimson banners hanging from the rafters, and a throne of dark oak waiting at the far end beneath the royal crest. Tonight, the strongest families in the Northern Territories had sent their daughters to be seen by King Alexander Blackthorn, the Alpha King whose name could silence a room before he even entered it. Emily was not one of those daughters. She had not been dressed in silk or brushed with moon powder or taught how to smile like she already owned the crown. Her long black hair had been tied back with a plain ribbon, though loose strands kept falling against her cheeks. Her cloak was simple, gray, clean, and mended at the hem. The silver cuffs around her wrists had been polished until they shone brighter than anything she wore, a public reminder that the Whitmore household considered her debt unpaid. People glanced at her, then away, the way they looked at a stain on expensive fabric. A young noblewoman hid a laugh behind her fan. A lord leaned toward his friend and murmured something Emily chose not to hear. She focused instead on the tray. On keeping her breathing even, on placing each glass exactly where it belonged. When a kitchen boy no older than 12 stumbled near the banquet table, nearly dropping a basket of warm rolls, Emily shifted without thinking and steadied him with her elbow. The movement tugged the chain hard against her wrist, and pain flickered up her arm, but the rolls stayed in the basket. The boy looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. Emily gave him the smallest smile, the kind her mother used to give her when the world felt too cold to survive. "Go on," she whispered. "You're all right." He hurried away, unnoticed by everyone who mattered, except Vanessa. Across the hall, dressed in silver silk and moonstone, Vanessa Whitmore watched Emily with a smile sharp enough to cut pride into ribbons. Tonight, Vanessa expected to be chosen. Tonight, Emily was meant to remind the court what happened to girls who had nothing, owned nothing, and belonged nowhere. But beyond the great doors, iron hinges began to groan, and the wolves closest to the entrance suddenly stopped speaking, as if the air itself had bowed before someone unseen. The doors did not open yet, but their deep metallic groan rolled through the hall like distant thunder, and every guest seemed to straighten at once. Emily felt the change before she understood it, the way the air grew heavier, the way the polished goblets stopped chiming, the way even the flames in the chandeliers appeared to hold still. Somewhere beyond those doors, King Alexander Blackthorn was approaching. She had heard stories about him since childhood, stories whispered over winter fires and behind locked kitchen doors, stories of a ruler so powerful that grown alphas lowered their voices when they spoke his name. But Emily had never imagined she would be standing less than 50 feet from his throne with silver around her wrists and wine staining the edge of her sleeve. "Do not stare," Lady Vanessa murmured as she passed behind her, her perfume sweet enough to burn. "Girls like you survive by being invisible." Emily lowered her chin. The words should have stung less by now. She had heard versions of them for 3 years, ever since the Whitmore carriage had arrived at her mother's cottage after the funeral, all black wheels and shining harnesses, bringing papers stamped with debts Emily had never seen before. Vanessa's father had said her mother owed the household for medicine, shelter, and old protection fees. Emily had been 17, alone, and too numb with grief to question the seal. By sunset, she had been taken from the only home she knew. By winter, the cottage had been sold. By spring, everyone in the Whitmore estate called her an indebted Omega, as if those 2 words explained every locked door, every unpaid hour, every command spoken as though kindness were a privilege above her rank. What none of them said aloud was that her mother, Clara Carter, had not been a debtor. She had been a healer. Not the grand kind who served nobles beneath stained glass windows, but the quiet kind who walked 5 miles through snow to soothe a feverish child, who could calm a panicked horse with one hand on its neck, who kept dried lavender, willow bark, and moonflower oil in little brown bottles beside the stove. Emily still remembered the warmth in her mother's palms. She remembered Clara brushing black hair from her face and whispering, "Gentle does not mean weak, my star." The memory almost made Emily breathe wrong. She gripped the tray tighter. The silver cuffs shifted against her skin, cold and biting, and beneath them the faint mark on her wrist pulsed once, hidden under the polished metal. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward it. That was the real reason for the chains. Not debt. Not discipline. Not tradition. Silver dulled scent, and Emily's scent had begun to change 1 month ago, soft as night flowers after rain, impossible to fully bury, no matter how much Vanessa ordered the servants to scrub her sleeves with ash soap. Emily did not know what it meant. Vanessa did. Or at least she feared it enough to keep Emily bound whenever royal guests were near. "Remember," Vanessa whispered, smiling for the room while her voice stayed low and cold, "if the king asks who you are, you say nothing." Emily nodded, but a strange warmth moved through her chest as the great doors finally began to open, and for the first time that night, invisibility felt less like safety and more like a cage someone else had built around her name. The great doors opened only halfway at first, wide enough for the royal guard to enter in 2 silent lines, their black armor catching the candlelight like ice over midnight. The room bowed before the king was even visible. Heads lowered. Fans stopped moving. Conversations died in unfinished breaths. Emily stepped back instinctively, but Vanessa's gloved fingers closed around her arm beneath the tray, hidden from the court by folds of silver silk. "Not there," Vanessa breathed through her smile. "Behind me." Emily obeyed because the tray was full, because the cuffs were cold, because one wrong move in a room like this could be turned into a crime before she had time to explain herself. Vanessa glided forward into the cleared path, every inch the perfect daughter of a noble house, her pale hair arranged beneath a delicate moonstone comb, her gown shimmering as though someone had sewn starlight into the fabric. Around her, other young women adjusted their posture, but none of them drew the same confident murmurs from the crowd. Lady Vanessa Whitmore had been raised for this night. She knew where to stand, how long to lower her eyes, when to smile as if humility were natural to her. Emily stood 3 steps behind her with a wine tray in aching hands, a grey shadow attached to silver silk. The contrast was so sharp that even Emily felt it. Vanessa looked like a future queen. Emily looked like proof that queens needed servants beneath them. Lord Cedric Hale, the royal master of ceremonies, swept into the aisle with a staff of polished black wood. His voice rang through the hall, smooth and practiced. "Noble houses of the Northern Territories, tonight we gather beneath the blood moon to honor unity, loyalty, and the sacred bond that strengthens the crown." A ripple of approval moved through the guests. Emily kept her eyes on the marble. Sacred bond. The word settled oddly in her chest. She had grown up hearing that the moon chose with wisdom, that no rank, fortune, or title could command true destiny. Yet everyone in that hall behaved as though destiny could be arranged like seating at a banquet table. The daughters of wealthy families stood nearest the throne. The daughters of weaker houses stood behind them. Servants lined the walls. Omegas without protection carried trays. Emily wondered where the moon was supposed to look if everyone kept pushing girls like her into corners. A soft clatter broke her thought. Near the end of the banquet table, a little maid dropped a silver spoon and froze in terror as Lord Cedric's gaze cut toward her. Emily moved before fear could stop her. She stepped out from behind Vanessa, bent carefully, and picked up the spoon with her cuffed hands. The chain tightened, drawing a quiet breath from her, but she polished the spoon against her sleeve and placed it back on the table as if nothing had happened. "It was my fault," Emily said softly, taking the blame before the child could be named. A few guests laughed at her boldness. Vanessa's smile hardened. Lord Cedric's eyes narrowed. And from beyond the line of guards, where the shadow of a tall man now stretched across the open doorway, something in the air shifted again, deeper this time, as if the power approaching had noticed the smallest act of mercy in the loudest room of the kingdom. Lord Cedric let the silence stretch until Emily could feel it pressing against her shoulders. The spoon lay perfectly in place, the little maid had slipped safely behind the serving line, and yet every eye in the nearest circle had turned toward Emily as if kindness itself had broken some royal law. Vanessa did not look at the child Emily had protected. She looked only at the space Emily had stepped into, a space meant for polished bloodlines and careful smiles, not for a poor Omega with silver at her wrists. How generous, Vanessa said, her voice light enough to sound amused to the guests and sharp enough for Emily to understand. Emily is always eager to claim mistakes. It is one of the few talents she possesses. A soft wave of laughter moved across the tables. Emily lowered her head, but the heat in her face rose anyway. She could endure insults when they were thrown in private corridors, over laundry basins, behind kitchen doors. Public cruelty was different. It dressed itself in manners and asked the whole room to agree. Lord Cedric tapped his black staff once against the marble. An admirable servant accepts correction with grace, he said. Since she has taken responsibility, she may demonstrate that grace before the court. Emily's fingers tightened around the tray. Vanessa reached for a crystal goblet filled with deep red wine. For one breath, Emily hoped she would simply take it. Instead, Vanessa let the base tilt just enough. Wine spilled across the white marble in a slow, shining stream, spreading at Emily's feet like a stain the whole kingdom could see. Gasps rose, followed by whispers, then laughter from the younger nobles who had been waiting for permission to enjoy her shame. Emily stared at the spilled wine. Her throat tightened, but she made herself breathe. One breath. Then another. She had survived colder rooms than this. On your knees, Lord Cedric ordered, not loudly, because he did not need to be loud. Authority carried for him. The chain between Emily's cuffs gave a small, silver sound as she lowered herself to the floor. The marble was cold through the thin fabric of her cloak. She reached for a linen cloth from the tray, but Cedric's staff blocked it gently, almost politely. Hands first. The court should see sincerity. The words pulled another round of laughter from the tables. Emily did not look up. She could not let them see what it cost her. She placed her cuffed hands against the wine and began to wipe the marble with her bare fingers, careful, slow, dignified in the only way left to her. The silver cuffs pressed into her skin. A faint warmth pulsed under the hidden mark on her wrist, as if something inside her was waking under pressure, refusing to be buried. Vanessa leaned close enough for only Emily to hear. Remember your place. Emily swallowed. For one fragile second, she imagined her mother's hands over hers, steady and warm, and heard the old whisper in memory. Gentle does not mean weak, my star. At the entrance, the last door swung fully open. The laughter faded piece by piece. A shadow fell across the red stain on the floor, long and still, edged by the dark gleam of royal armor and the deep crimson sweep of a king's cloak. Emily did not raise her head, but every instinct in her body knew the room had changed. King Alexander Blackthorne had entered at the exact moment they meant for her to disappear. For one heartbeat, no one moved. King Alexander Blackthorne stood beneath the carved archway as if the palace had been built around the shape of him and had only now remembered its purpose. He was tall enough that the royal guards beside him seemed smaller, broader through the shoulders than any man Emily had ever seen, his black hair falling past his collar in dark waves that caught the candlelight. He wore royal black armor etched with fine silver lines, the polished metal marked by old scratches that did nothing to lessen its beauty. A heavy fur mantle rested over one shoulder, and behind him flowed a deep crimson cloak, rich and dark as the last light before night. At his side hung the sword of the Blackthorne kings, quiet in its sheath, but impossible to ignore. The entire hall bowed. Chairs scraped softly. Jewels dipped. Even Lord Cedric lowered his head with careful speed. Vanessa sank into a graceful curtsy, her smile returning as if the spilled wine, the laughter, and the omega on the floor had all been part of some charming little performance arranged for royal amusement. Emily remained where she was because she had no choice. Her knees were on the marble. Her fingers were stained with wine. The chain between her wrists had caught beneath the edge of Lord Cedric's staff, pinning her close enough to the floor that rising would only make another scene. She kept her head bowed so low that all she saw was the edge of the king's shadow stretching over the red stain she had been ordered to clean. "Your Majesty," Lord Cedric said, his voice smooth again, though not quite steady. "We are honored by your arrival. The noble houses await your blessing." Alexander did not answer. The silence that followed felt colder than winter glass. Emily heard the faint creak of leather as he removed one glove, then the slow, measured sound of his boots crossing the marble. Each step came closer. Not toward the throne. Not toward Vanessa. Toward the place where Emily knelt. Her breath caught before she could stop it. She told herself he must be looking at the wine. At the broken shape of etiquette. At the embarrassment of a servant disrupting a royal entrance. But the air around her changed, warm and heavy, carrying the scent of pine forests after snow and steel left beneath moonlight. Her hands trembled against the floor. The hidden mark beneath her cuff pulsed again, stronger this time, a quiet glow trapped under silver. Alexander stopped in front of her. No one spoke. Emily could feel hundreds of eyes on the back of her neck, waiting for the king to dismiss her, punish her, or step over her like every other powerful person had done. Instead, his voice descended into the silence, deep and controlled, with something dangerous held carefully behind it. "Why is she on the floor?" The question was simple. That made it worse. Lord Cedric lifted his head just enough to smile. "A minor correction, Your Majesty." The girl spilled wine and was demonstrating proper humility. Emily closed her eyes. She had not spilled it. But she had learned long ago that truth without power was treated like noise. Vanessa gave a soft, practiced laugh. "Emily is harmless, Your Majesty. A poor omega under our care. She sometimes forgets herself when kindness is mistaken for importance." The king said nothing for so long that the hall seemed to shrink around them. Then Emily felt his gaze lower to her wrists. The silver cuffs were bright against her pale skin, too tight, too polished, too deliberate. His stillness changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But the room felt it. Every wolf in the hall felt the moment the Alpha King stopped seeing a servant and began seeing a wrong that had been dressed up as tradition. Alexander looked at the silver cuffs as if the metal itself had spoken a language only kings and wolves could understand. The hall waited for his judgment, but Emily could barely hear the silence over the rush of blood in her ears. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to pull her stained hands beneath her cloak and hide the trembling that had started in her fingers. But Lord Cedric's staff still held the chain low against the marble, and the more she tried not to move, the more every breath reminded her that she was trapped in the center of a room built to admire power. "Remove your staff," Alexander said. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Cedric blinked once, then lifted the polished black wood away so quickly that the chain gave a soft, freeing clink. Emily shifted back on her heels, keeping her head bowed. The air changed again, carrying the king's scent closer now, winter pine, cold stone, and something wild that made the omega part of her go terribly still. Not afraid. Listening. That frightened her more than fear would have. She had spent years teaching herself not to hope when powerful people came near. Hope made a person careless. Hope made pain sharper when it left. "Stand," Alexander said. Emily tried. Her knees had gone stiff from the marble, and the tray at her side rocked softly as she gathered herself. Before she could steady her balance, a large hand appeared in her lowered field of vision, bare now, unloved, palm open. The room seemed to stop breathing. Kings did not offer hands to servants. Alphas did not lower themselves toward indebted omegas. Yet Alexander's hand remained there, steady and patient, as if he were not surrounded by every noble house in the Northern Territories. Emily stared at it for one heartbeat too long. His skin was pale beneath the candlelight, his fingers marked by old calluses, the hand of a ruler who had held more than a crown. She placed her fingertips in his palm because refusing the Alpha King felt impossible, but the moment they touched, warmth moved through her like dawn breaking over frozen ground. The hidden mark under her cuff pulsed so strongly she almost gasped. Alexander felt it too. She knew because his hand closed gently around hers, not possessive, not harsh, simply certain, and his dark eyes sharpened on her face as she finally looked up. Emily had never seen eyes like his. They were a storm-gray blue, deep and bright at once, carrying the weight of command and the surprise of something wounded awake. He looked at her as though the entire hall had faded behind her. As though the spilled wine, the jeweled guests, the throne, and Vanessa's waiting smile had all become distant things. Then his gaze moved to the cuffs again, and the muscle in his jaw tightened. "Silver," he said quietly. The word spread through the hall like a cold draft. Vanessa stepped forward at once, graceful and pale. "For safety, Your Majesty. Emily has been unsettled lately. We only wished to protect the dignity of your evening." Alexander did not look at her. "I did not ask you." Vanessa's smile faltered. Emily's heart stumbled in her chest. No one spoke to Lady Vanessa Whitmore that way. No one, except the man standing between her and every cruel explanation the room had prepared. Alexander lowered his voice so only Emily and those closest could hear. "Did they hurt you?" Emily's first instinct was to say no. It rose to her lips automatically, shaped by years of survival. But his thumb rested near the edge of the cuff, careful not to press, and the gentleness of that restraint undid her more than anger ever could. She looked down at the faint red marks the silver had left on her skin. "I am all right," she whispered. It was not an answer. Alexander understood. His eyes lifted, and for the first time that night, the Alpha King looked past Emily to the court that had laughed while she knelt. The quiet around him deepened, no longer empty, no longer formal, but alive with warning. Inside his chest, the king's wolf stirred with a single word that Emily could not hear, yet somehow felt. Mate. Lord Cedric was the first to recover, because men who built their lives on rules often believed rules could protect them from truth. He stepped forward with a shallow bow, his face pale but arranged into courtly concern. "Your Majesty, with respect, the girl is property of the Whitmore household until her debt is settled. Her restraints are lawful, documented, and witnessed by the estate council." The word property passed through the hall like a stain no one wanted to touch. Emily felt Alexander's hand grow still around hers. Not tighter. Never painful. Just still in a way that made the nearest guard straighten without being told. "Say that again," the king said. "Cedric." Swallowed. Vanessa moved quickly, placing herself beside him with a graceful dip of her head. "Lord Cedric speaks only of household law, Your Majesty. Emily is unfortunate, but she has been treated with more mercy than most in her position. My family took her in after her mother passed. We fed her, clothed her, gave her purpose. She is emotional, and sometimes confused, but harmless." Emily looked at the floor. Each word was polished, believable, and almost entirely false. That was Vanessa's gift. She could make a cage sound like charity. Alexander finally turned his eyes to Vanessa, and the beauty of her smile faltered beneath the weight of his attention. "You fed her," he said. "You clothed her. You gave her purpose." His voice was calm enough to make the words feel dangerous without ever becoming loud. "And then you brought her to my court in silver chains." No one laughed now. The younger nobles who had mocked Emily stared into their cups. The noble women who had whispered behind their fans lowered them inch by inch. Even the musicians in the balcony held their bows above silent strings. Emily wished she could step away from the center of it all, but Alexander still stood beside her, and somehow his presence made the shame less able to reach her. It was as though he had become a wall between her and every cruel eye in the room. Vanessa lifted her chin. The cuffs are ceremonial. Alexander looked back at Emily's wrists. Ceremony does not leave marks like that. The words were soft. They landed hard. Emily felt heat rise behind her eyes, not from fear this time, but from the terrible relief of being believed before she had even found the courage to speak. Lord Cedric tried again. Your Majesty, the Blood Moon Banquet is meant for choosing a Luna from worthy houses. Perhaps this matter could be handled later, privately, without disturbing the sacred evening. Alexander's gaze did not move from Emily. The sacred evening was disturbed the moment my court watched an Omega kneel in pain and called it entertainment. A quiet shock traveled through the hall. Emily heard someone inhale sharply. Vanessa's expression tightened, but she forced a wounded softness into her voice. Surely you do not mean to embarrass the noble houses over a servant. Alexander released Emily's hand only to reach toward the clasp of his crimson cloak. The movement was slow, deliberate, impossible to misunderstand. No, he said. I mean to remind them what honor looks like. He drew the cloak from his shoulders and placed it around Emily with a care so gentle that the whole room seemed to ache from it. The fur-lined weight settled over her grey cloak, warm and royal and impossibly real. Emily froze beneath it, her breath caught halfway between disbelief and trembling gratitude. Vanessa went white. Cedric stared as if the floor had disappeared under his feet. Alexander stepped slightly in front of Emily, not hiding her, but standing with her, placing her where every eye had to see the truth they had tried to bury. Tell me her full name, he commanded. Cedric hesitated. Vanessa said nothing. Emily, wrapped in the king's cloak, lifted her chin for the first time that night. Her voice was small, but it carried. Emily Carter. Alexander turned back to her, and something ancient softened in his eyes. Then, Emily Carter, no one in this hall will speak over you again. The king's cloak was still warm from his shoulders, and Emily stood inside its crimson folds as though she had stepped into a different life by mistake. Every breath she took carried the faint scent of winter pine and royal steel, steadying something inside her that had been shaking for years. Alexander turned his attention to Lord Cedric. Bring me the debt papers. Cedric's face tightened. Your Majesty, those documents are held by the Whitmore estate. This is not the proper setting for a household review. Alexander's eyes did not change, but the guards nearest the wall moved at once. Cedric understood then that the request had never been a request. With stiff fingers, he reached into the leather case at his side and withdrew a folded packet sealed in blue wax. Emily stared at it. 3 years of commands, locked doors, unpaid service, and shame had been carried in that little stack of paper. Alexander took the packet, broke the seal, and read in silence. The hall watched him read. Vanessa watched Emily, and for the first time, there was fear beneath her beauty. Clara Carter, Alexander said quietly. Emily's heart lifted at her mother's name. He looked at the second page, then the third. These are not debts. These are healers' agreements. Royal protection contracts issued to a Moonvale caretaker. The word Moonvale moved through the court like a forgotten prayer. Older wolves raised their heads. A white-haired noblewoman pressed a hand to her mouth. Lord Cedric went still. Vanessa stepped back half an inch, but Alexander saw it. Explain, he said. Cedric's voice thinned. The Moonvale line ended years ago. No, Alexander replied, looking at Emily's cuffed wrists. It was hidden. He reached toward the nearest royal guard without looking away from her. Key. A small black key was placed in his palm. Emily held very still as he lifted her hands. He moved with care, as if even the silver deserved no chance to hurt her again. The first cuff opened with a soft click. Then the second. The chain slipped free and fell into Alexander's waiting hand, silent now, stripped of its power to follow her. The moment the silver left her skin, warmth bloomed from beneath the red marks on her wrists. A pale crescent of light appeared there, delicate and bright, shaped like a moon cradled by tiny stars. Emily gasped. Across the hall, several alphas bowed their heads before they seemed to know they were doing it. The air changed around her, no longer heavy with perfume and fear, but alive with the clean scent Vanessa had tried to bury, night flowers after rain, snow over cedar, and something ancient that called to the throne itself. Alexander closed his eyes for 1 second, as if the truth had reached him deeper than sound. When he opened them, the storm in his gaze had softened into certainty. "Moonveil," he said, not to the court, but to her. Emily looked at the glowing mark on her wrist, then at the woman who had kept it hidden. Vanessa's lips parted, but no graceful lie came quickly enough. Alexander folded the false debt papers once and handed them to his guard. "These documents are void. Emily Carter belongs to no household." The hall stayed silent. Emily felt the words enter her slowly, almost too gently to believe. No household. No debt. No chain. Then Alexander stepped beside her, facing the court with the loosened silver in his hand. "And the next person who calls her servant," he said, his voice low enough to make every candle seem still, "will answer to the crown." For several seconds, the court did not seem to know how to breathe. The silver chain rested in Alexander's hand, harmless now, just a strip of polished metal that had lost its authority the moment someone powerful chose truth over tradition. Emily stood beside him in the crimson cloak, her wrists bare for the first time that night, the pale moonveil mark glowing softly against her skin. She should have felt exposed. She should have felt afraid. Instead, she felt the strange, trembling weight of being seen. Not displayed, not judged, not used as a warning for other Omegas, but seen as a person whose name mattered. Across the hall, Lady Vanessa Whitmore lowered her eyes, and the movement sent a quiet ripple through the noble families who had spent the evening measuring themselves against her. Lord Cedric looked older in the candlelight, his polished confidence gone thin around the edges. No one rushed to defend them. Cruelty was loud when it believed the room agreed. It became very quiet when honor entered wearing a crown. Alexander handed the silver chain to a guard. "Place it in the royal archive," he said. "Let every future council remember what was done here, and why it will not be done again." Emily's throat tightened. She thought of her mother then, of Clara Carter standing in their little kitchen, drying herbs by the window, telling a small girl that gentleness could outlast storms. For years, Emily had carried those words like a candle cupped against the wind. Tonight, in the great hall of Blackthorn Palace, that candle had become visible. Alexander turned to her, and though hundreds of people watched, his voice softened until it felt meant only for the space between them. "Emily Carter, daughter of Clara, last known heir of Moonveil, you owe this court nothing." The words entered her like sunrise. Her eyes burned, but she did not look away. "Then what happens to me now?" she asked. It was the question of a girl who had been owned too long to understand freedom all at once. Alexander did not answer quickly. He looked toward the empty throne, then back at her, as if the choice before him had already changed the shape of the night. "Now," he said, "you choose where you stand." The simplicity of it nearly broke her. Not an order. Not a bargain. A choice. Emily looked over the hall, at the faces that had laughed, the faces that now lowered in shame, the servants pressed against the walls with wide, hopeful eyes, and the young kitchen boy clutching his basket of rolls as if he had just watched the moon rewrite the world. Slowly, Emily took one step forward. The king's cloak moved with her. The moonveil mark brightened. One by one, the wolves nearest the aisle bowed their heads, not to her chains, not to her poverty, not to the lie of her debt, but to the quiet power that had survived beneath all of it. Alexander extended his hand again. This time, Emily placed her hand in his without fear. A silver blue light stirred beneath their joined palms, gentle as snowfall, strong as a vow. The old banners above the throne trembled though no wind entered the hall. Somewhere deep within the palace, a bell rang once, clear and solemn. The blood moon had chosen. Alexander faced the court, his dark armor shining beneath the candles, his crimson cloak now resting on Emily's shoulders instead of his own. "The banquet is over," he said. "The judgment has begun." And as every noble in the hall bowed lower, Emily Carter stood beside the Alpha King, no longer hidden behind anyone, while destiny opened its eyes.